The scarred, solitary outcast Calder Vance lives far from town, bound by a silent debt he can never repay. The only person who ever showed him kindness, Mara Ellison, a resilient homesteader, once treated his scars without asking questions. Calder discovers Mara's barn in flames and masked riders fleeing into the dark. Their brand marks them as the brutal gang that once betrayed him, the Red Mesa Boys, led by the cunning and vicious Brant Corvin. Establish guilt, urgency, and the sense that Calder has already failed Mara once. The fire painted the night sky the color of old blood. Calder Vance stood at the edge of the tree line, his horse snorting beneath him, steam rising from its flanks in the cold October air. The barn was already collapsing, timbers groaning like dying men as flames chewed through the structure with methodical hunger. He could see the silhouettes of riders disappearing into the darkness beyond the homestead, their movements deliberate, unhurried. They had done what they came to do. His scarred hands tightened on the reins until his knuckles went white. The brand on the nearest fence post was still smoldering, burned deep into the wood with a running iron, a crude circle, with 3 lines radiating outward like a child's drawing of the sun. The Red Mesa Boys, the same men who had carved their own brand into his life 5 years ago, leaving him with scars that twisted from his collarbone to his jawline, a permanent testament to his failure. But it was the homestead that made his chest constrict, made the air feel suddenly too thin. He knew this land. He knew the woman who worked it. Mara Ellison. Calder spurred his horse forward, the animal's hooves churning up clouds of ash as they crossed the property. The main house still stood, windows dark, door hanging open like a scream frozen in wood. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, boots hitting the ground hard enough to jar his spine. The heat from the dying barn washed over him in waves as he approached the house, every instinct screaming that he was too late, that he had failed her just as he had failed everyone else he had ever tried to protect. Inside, the house was chaos. Furniture overturned, dishes shattered across the floor, a chair broken against the wall. But no blood, not yet. That absence should have been a relief, but Calder knew better. The Red Mesa Boys didn't kill quick when they wanted to send a message. His eyes found the scrap of fabric caught on a splinter near the doorframe blue gingham, the same pattern as the dress Mara had been mending the last time he had ridden past her property 3 weeks ago. He had kept his distance then, as he always did, watching from the ridgeline to make sure she was safe before moving on. Always watching, never close enough to matter. The fabric was torn, pulled away by force. They had dragged her out. Calder's hand moved to the Colt holstered at his hip, fingers tracing the worn grip. The gun had been silent for 5 years, not fired in anger since the night he had tried to stop the massacre at Copper Ridge. The night yet Rourke had held him down while the others burned the settlement, forcing him to watch as families died screaming. The night Brant Corvin had smiled and told him he would live, that he would carry the blame, that everyone would know Calder Vance as the man who led the Red Mesa Boys to slaughter. The scars on his face throbbed with the memory. He should have known they would find him eventually. Should have known that the quiet life he had carved out in the mountains, the solitary existence that kept everyone at arm's length, would never be enough distance. The Red Mesa Boys didn't forgive, they didn't forget. And they certainly didn't let anyone walk away. But Mara had nothing to do with his past. She was innocent of his sins. 3 years ago, when he had stumbled into her homestead with a bullet wound festering in his side, she had taken him in without questions. She had cleaned the wound, fed him, let him sleep in her barn until he was strong enough to ride. When he had tried to pay her, she had refused. When he had tried to thank her, she had simply told him that kindness didn't need explaining. In all his years of running, of hiding from his past, that single act of grace had been the only thing that kept him from disappearing entirely into the darkness. She had reminded him that somewhere beneath the scars and the guilt, there was still something human worth saving. And now the Red Mesa Boys had taken her because of him. Calder stood in the wreckage of her home, surrounded by the evidence of violence, and felt the familiar weight of guilt settle over his shoulders like a yoke, This was his fault. His presence in her life, however distant, had marked her. The gang had found him through her, had targeted her to draw him out, to finish what they had started 5 years ago. He had sworn to protect her from afar. He had failed. The night air outside was sharp with the smell of smoke and burning hay. Calder walked back to his horse, his mind already calculating distances, routes, the likely direction the riders had taken. North toward the Badlands, probably. Toward Red Mesa territory, where Brad Corvin ruled over a network of smugglers, cattle thieves, and killers with an iron fist and a silver tongue. He mounted up, turning the horse toward the darkness, when a voice called out from the road. "Vance! Calder Vance, hold up!" Calder's hand moved to his gun, old reflexes taking over before his mind caught up. But the figure approaching on horseback was wearing a tin star that caught the moonlight, and the voice was rough with age rather than menace. Sheriff Amos Greeley reined in his horse a dozen yards away, his weathered face drawn tight with concern. He was past 60 now, with a white mustache that drooped over his upper lip and eyes that had seen too many hard years. Calder had met him exactly once, 6 months ago, when the sheriff had ridden out to his cabin to ask if he had seen any sign of rustlers in the high country. Calder had said no and sent him on his way. "Saw the smoke from town," Greeley said, his gaze moving past Calder to the burning barn. "Came as fast as I could. Where's Mara?" "Gone," Calder said flatly. "Red Mesa boys took her." The sheriff's expression darkened. "You certain?" Calder gestured toward the fence post with the brand. Greeley rode closer, studying the mark, and his jaw clenched. "Brad Corvin's crew. They've been getting bolder lately, pushing further south. But this ... He looked back at the ruined homestead. "This is different. This is personal." "It's personal," Calder agreed, his voice hard as flint. "They came for me. She's just the bait." Greeley studied him for a long moment, and Calder could see the calculation happening behind those tired eyes. The sheriff knew his reputation, or at least knew the whispers. The scarred man who lived alone in the mountains. The outcast who avoided town. The ghost of Copper Ridge. "You're going after her," Greeley said. It wasn't a question. "I am. Then you'll need help." Calder shook his head. "This isn't your fight, Sheriff. And anyone who rides with me is likely to end up dead. With all due respect, Vance, that's not for you to decide." Greeley's voice carried the weight of authority that came from decades of keeping the peace in rough country. "Mara Ellison is one of ours. She's lived in this valley for 8 years, weathered droughts and hard winters, helped her neighbors when they needed it. If the Red Mesa boys think they can ride into my territory and take one of my people without consequences, they need to learn different. Your territory ends at the valley," Calder said. "Where I'm going, the law doesn't reach. Then it's a good thing I'm not just bringing the law." Greeley turned his horse back toward the road. "Come to town. 1 hour. There are others who want to ride." "I don't need others," Calder called after him. "I work alone." "You need others," Greeley shot back, "whether you want them or not." 1 hour, Vance. Don't make me come looking for you." The sheriff disappeared into the darkness, leaving Calder alone with the dying fire and the weight of decisions he didn't want to make. He had spent 5 years keeping his distance from people, from connections, from anything that might turn into another Copper Ridge. The scars on his face were a constant reminder of what happened when he let himself care about the outcome. But Mara was different. She had been kind when the world had shown him nothing but cruelty. She had asked for nothing and given everything. And now she was paying the price for his proximity to her life. He owed her a debt he could never repay. But he could try. Calder turned his horse toward town. The settlement of redemption sat in the valley like a collection of scattered bones, small and weathered and stubborn. 24 buildings lined a single main street, with a church at one end and a saloon at the other, as if the town itself couldn't decide between salvation and damnation. Calder had been here perhaps 3 times in 3 years, each visit brief and purposeful supplies, nothing more. He knew the faces but not the names, kept his head down and his conversations shorter than a prayer. But tonight, the town was awake. Lanterns burned in windows up and down the street. Small clusters of people stood in doorways, speaking in low voices, their faces drawn with concern. News of the fire had spread quickly, as news always did in small places. By now, everyone would know that Mara Ellison had been taken. By morning, they would know that Calder Vance was going after her. Sheriff Greeley's office sat near the center of town, a squat building with barred windows and a porch that sagged slightly to one side. Calder tied his horse to the rail and stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the lamplight. The sheriff was there, along with 3 others. The first was a woman in her mid-30s, lean and hard-featured, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that could cut glass. She wore men's trousers and a canvas coat, and a Winchester rifle leaned against the wall beside her chair. Her hands were calloused from work, and there was a stillness about her that spoke of someone who had learned to wait patiently for the right moment to act. Lena Harrow, Greeley said by way of introduction, runs the Circle H ranch west of here. Lost her husband to Brant Corvin's men 2 years back. She's got reasons of her own to ride north. Lena nodded once at Calder, her expression unreadable. I know you, she said quietly. Seen you pass by the ranch a few times. You never stop. No, Calder said. I don't. Good policy, Lena said. Keeps things simple. The second was an old man, maybe 70, with a wild white beard and eyes that still held a spark of defiance despite his age. His left leg was splinted and wrapped, the trouser leg cut away to accommodate the bandages. He sat with a cane across his lap, his gnarled hands gripping it like a weapon. Elias Strand, Greeley continued. Miner, knows the canyons and passes north of here better than anyone alive. Took a bad fall in a shaft last month, crushed his leg. But he's insisting he can ride. I can ride, Elias growled. And I know routes through the Badlands that Brant Corvin's boys don't. Hidden trails, water sources, places to make a stand. You want to catch them, you'll need me. Calder looked at the old man's ruined leg. You'll slow us down. I'll keep up, Elias said flatly. Or I'll die trying. Either way, I'm coming. The third was barely more than a boy, maybe 19, with a shock of sandy hair and a face that hadn't quite lost its softness. He wore a stable hand's clothes and had the nervous energy of someone who desperately wanted to prove himself. He stood when Calder entered, as if presenting himself for inspection. Tommy Rook, the boy said quickly. I work at the livery. I've been practicing with my gun, and I can ride as good as anyone. Miss Ellison used to bring her horse to me for shoeing. She was always kind, always fair. I want to help bring her back. Calder felt something cold settle in his chest. The boy was too young, too eager. He would get himself killed in the first encounter. No, Calder said. You're staying here. Tommy's face flushed. But I can. You'll die, Calder said bluntly. First ambush, first firefight. You'll panic or freeze or do something stupid, and you'll get yourself killed. Or worse, you'll get someone else killed. Stay here. Vance, Greeley said quietly. This isn't a debate, Sheriff. Calder turned to face the older man. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask for help. You're forcing this on me, fine. But I'm not taking a boy into Red Mesa territory to die. Then teach him not to die, Lena said. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. We all learn sometime. Someone taught us. Now we teach him. Calder stared at her. This isn't the time or place for lessons. It's exactly the time and place, Elias said. Boy wants to stand for something. Wants to fight for someone who showed him kindness. You going to tell him that's wrong? I'm going to tell him it's suicide. So was Copper Ridge, Elias said quietly. The room went silent. Calder's hand moved instinctively to his face, tracing the ridge of scar tissue along his jaw. They knew. Of course they knew. In a place like this, secrets lasted about as long as snow in summer. Copper Ridge wasn't my fault, Calder said, his voice low and dangerous. Didn't say it was, Elias replied. But you tried to stop it anyway. Tried to save people even when it meant going against your own. That's why Yet Rourke carved you up and left you alive to punish you for having a conscience. The old miner leaned forward on his cane. We all know what happened there, Vance. We know you're not what the stories say. And we're choosing to ride with you anyway. Calder felt the walls closing in, felt the familiar urge to run, to disappear back into the mountains where no one could ask anything of him. But Mara's face rose in his mind, her quiet smile, the gentle way she had cleaned his wounds without flinching at the scars, the simple dignity with which she had offered him shelter when the world had offered him nothing. He couldn't do this alone. He had tried doing everything alone for 5 years, and all it had earned him was more scars and more ghosts. Fine, he said finally, but we do this my way. No heroes, no glory. We move fast, we hit hard, and if I tell you to run, you run? Understood? They nodded, even Tommy, though the boy's eyes shone with an excitement that made Calder's stomach turn. Good, Greeley said. We leave at first light. That gives us time to gather supplies and— No, Calder interrupted. We leave now. Every hour we wait is another hour they have with her. Every mile we let them put between us and them makes the rescue harder. We ride now or I ride alone. Lena stood, reaching for her rifle. Then we ride now. They left Redemption in the deep hours of night, when the moon hung low and heavy in the western sky. 5 riders moving north through country that grew rougher with each passing mile. Calder led, his eyes scanning the darkness for signs of the trail, for disturbed earth or broken branches that might indicate the passage of horses. Behind him rode Greeley, then Lena, then Elias on a gentle mare that could accommodate his injured leg, and finally Tommy, who kept checking and rechecking his revolver like a talisman against fear. The land rose steadily as they traveled, the valley giving way to foothills, the foothills to rocky outcroppings and stands of pine that grew sparse and twisted in the thin air. By dawn, they had covered perhaps 15 miles, pushing the horses harder than was wise, but unable to stop when Mara's life hung in the balance. Calder called a halt near a spring where the horses could drink and rest. While the others tended to the animals, he dismounted and walked the perimeter, studying the ground, reading the story written in hoof prints and disturbed stones. 6 riders came through here, he said when Greeley joined him. Maybe 8 hours ago. Moving northeast toward Blackthorn Pass. You can tell all that from the tracks? Tommy asked, his voice betraying his exhaustion. You learn to read the land when you spend enough time alone in it, Calder said. The depth of the prints tells you how heavy the horses are loaded. The spacing tells you how fast they're moving. The direction tells you where they're confident enough to travel openly. They're not trying to hide, Lena observed. They want you to follow. Of course they do, Calder said. They took Mara to draw me out. This whole thing is a trap. Then why are we riding into it? Tommy asked. Because knowing it's a trap doesn't change what we have to do, Calder said. We just have to spring it on our terms instead of theirs. Elias hobbled over, leaning heavily on his cane. Blackthorn Pass, he said thoughtfully. That's rough country, steep canyons, lots of places for ambush. But if they're heading there, they're not going all the way to Red Mesa. They're stopping somewhere along the way. Why would they stop? Greeley asked. Because Blackthorn Pass isn't just a pass, Elias said. It's a crossroads. Old smuggler's route from the territorial days. You can move goods north toward the mining camps, south toward the settlements, east toward the rail line. If Brant Corvin's using it, he's running something through there. Probably not cattle. Something smaller, more valuable. Calder felt something click into place in his mind. Guns, he said quietly. Army rifles. There were reports last year about a shipment that went missing from Fort McClellan. No one ever found them. If Corvin's been running stolen army weapons through Blackthorn Pass, Greeley said slowly, then he's not just a cattle thief anymore. He's an arms dealer. That changes things. It changes why they took Mara, Lena said, her eyes sharp. She looked at Calder. You said they took her because of you. But what if that's not the whole story? What if they took her because of where she lives? Calder's chest tightened. Her land, he said. Her homestead sits at the southern approach to Blackthorn Pass. Anyone trying to reach the pass from the valley has to cross her property. Or close to it, Elias agreed. If she was paying attention, she might have seen riders moving through at odd hours. Might have started asking questions. She wouldn't have known what she was seeing, Greeley said. But Corvin wouldn't take that chance. If she'd mentioned it to the wrong person, if word had gotten out that there was regular traffic through her land ... they would have had to shut her up, Lena finished. Permanently, or close enough. Calder felt the guilt in his chest shift, not disappearing, but changing shape. He had spent 5 years believing that everyone he touched became marked for suffering, that his mere presence in someone's life was enough to doom them. But if Lena and Elias were right, then Mara hadn't been targeted because of him. She had been targeted because she was in the wrong place, had seen too much, represented a threat to Corvin's operation. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like the ground dropping away beneath his feet. For 5 years, his guilt had been a constant, a weight he carried that gave his solitude purpose. If he wasn't the cause of her danger, then what did that mean? Had he been wrong about Copper Ridge too? Had his presence there truly been the catalyst for massacre, or had he simply been convenient to blame? "Vance," Greeley said quietly. "You all right?" Calder realized he had been standing motionless, staring at nothing. "I'm fine," he said, though the words felt hollow. "We keep moving. If they're using Blackthorn Pass as a waypoint, that's where they'll have taken her. We need to reach it before they decide she's more trouble than she's worth." They mounted up again, the horses grudging but game. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill and casting long shadows across the broken country. The trail grew steeper, the vegetation sparser. By midday, they were riding through a landscape of red stone and scrub brush, where the wind carried the smell of dust and distance. Tommy rode up alongside Calder during one of the longer stretches. The boy had been quiet for hours, focusing on staying in the saddle, but now there was a question in his eyes that had clearly been building. "Can I ask you something?" Tommy said. Calder didn't look at him. "You can ask. Why do you live alone? I mean, you're good at this. Tracking, reading signs. You could be a scout, a lawman, something useful. Why hide in the mountains?" "Because useful people get other people killed," Calder said flatly. "That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense to you. It just has to be true." Tommy was silent for a moment. "Miss Ellison said you were kind. She told me once that you'd helped her fix a fence after a storm, even though you didn't stay for coffee after. She said you were the sort of man who did right things without expecting thanks." "She was wrong," Calder said. "Was she?" Tommy's voice carried no challenge, only curiosity. "Because you're here now. You could have kept writing when you saw that fire. You could have decided it wasn't your problem. But you didn't. I'm here because I owe her a debt." "Maybe," Tommy said. "Or maybe you're here because she was right about you, and you just don't want to admit it." Calder finally turned to look at the boy. Tommy met his gaze without flinching, despite the scars, despite the hardness in Calder's eyes. "You don't know anything about me," Calder said. "I know you're trying to save someone who showed you kindness," Tommy said. "That's enough." Before Calder could respond, Lena called out from ahead. "We've got company." Calder spurred his horse forward, joining Lena at the front of the group. She was pointing to a rise about half a mile ahead, where 3 riders sat silhouetted against the sky. Even at this distance, Calder could see they weren't bothering to hide. They were watching, waiting. "Red Mesa boys?" Greeley asked, riding up beside them. "Has to be," Calder said. "Corvin knows we're coming. He's been tracking us since we left town." "What do they want?" Tommy asked, his hand moving to his revolver. "They want to slow us down," Lena said. "Make us cautious. Make us waste time. Or they want to kill us right here," Elias said. "Save themselves the trouble of an ambush later." Calder studied the riders. They were too far away for accurate shooting, and they hadn't made any move to approach. They were scouts, meant to observe and report, but they also represented an opportunity. "Can you hit one of them from here?" Calder asked Lena. She pulled her Winchester from its scabbard, studying the distance, the wind. "Maybe. It's a long shot, and the light's tricky." "Don't try to kill them," Calder said. "Just get close enough to spook them. Make them think we're better armed than we are." Lena dismounted, finding a stable position against a boulder. She sighted carefully, adjusting for wind and elevation, her breathing slow and controlled. The rifle cracked once, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. On the distant rise, dust kicked up a few feet from the nearest rider's horse. The three scouts wheeled their mounts and disappeared over the ridge. "They'll report back to Corvin that we're armed and accurate," Greeley said. "That's going to make him more cautious." "Good," Calder said. "Cautious means he'll take his time setting up his next move. Cautious means Mara stays alive longer." They rode on, but the mood had changed. The abstract danger of pursuit had become concrete. Somewhere ahead, Brant Corvin was gathering his forces, preparing defenses, laying traps. And in the middle of it all was Mara, a woman whose only crime had been showing kindness to a stranger and living on land that happened to be valuable to murderers and thieves. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the landscape in shades of amber and rust. They stopped to rest the horses again near a dry creek bed that showed evidence of recent water flow, while the others prepared a cold camp. No fires, nothing to give away their position. Calder walked upstream, studying the ground. He found what he was looking for about 100 yards from the camp. Fresh tracks, less than an hour old. A single horse moving fast. The prints were deep on one side, suggesting the rider had been looking back over his shoulder rather than watching where he was going. Someone was running from Blackthorn Pass. Calder followed the tracks for another 50 yards, until they disappeared into a narrow side canyon. He stood at the entrance, listening. The wind moved through the rocks with a sound like breathing, but underneath it was something else. A horse, blowing hard, the scrape of a boot on stone. "You might as well come out," Calder called into the canyon. "I know you're there." Silence. Then, slowly a figure emerged from behind a boulder. It was a woman, maybe 25, with dark hair cut short and clothes that had once been fine but were now travel-stained and torn. She held a small revolver in one hand, the barrel shaking slightly. "Stay back," she said, her voice hoarse. "I'll shoot. I'm not here to hurt you," Calder said. "I'm looking for someone. A woman named Mara Ellison. Brant Corvin's men took her last night." The woman's expression flickered surprise, then recognition, then something darker. "Corvin," she said, and the name came out like a curse. "I know where he's keeping her. I can take you there." "Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Whitmore." "I was ... She hesitated. "I was with Corvin's operation. I handled accounts, kept track of shipments, but things got bad. Too bad. They started talking about expanding, about taking over homesteads, about clearing out anyone who might interfere. I heard them planning what to do with your friend, so I ran. Why should I trust you?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You shouldn't. I've done things I'm not proud of. Helped them move stolen goods, doctored ledgers, looked the other way when people got hurt. But there's a line, and taking innocent women to use as leverage crossed it. If you're going after Corvin, I want to help. I want to make this right." Calder studied her. The gun in her hand was small, more for show than killing. Her eyes held fear but also determination. She was telling the truth, or at least believed she was. "Come back to camp," he said. "We'll talk." Sarah followed him back to where the others waited. When Greeley saw her, his hand moved to his gun, but Calder shook his head. "She's not Red Mesa," he said. "She's running from them. Says she knows where they're keeping Mara." Sarah sat down heavily on a rock, accepting water from Tommy with shaking hands. Blackthorn Pass has a line shack about 3 miles north of the main canyon. Corvin uses it as a waypoint for shipments moving through. That's where they'll have her. There are maybe a dozen men there, maybe more. They're heavily armed rifles, revolvers, even a couple of shotguns. 12 men, Elias said. Against the 5 of us. 6, Sarah said quietly. If you'll have me, can you shoot? Lena asked. I'm not good, but I'm not helpless. Sarah's jaw set. And I know the layout of that shack. I know where they'll post guards, where they keep supplies, where the weaknesses are. That has to count for something. Calder crouched in front of her. Why are you really doing this? You could have kept running, headed for the border. Started over somewhere far from here. Why risk coming back? Sarah met his eyes. Because I'm tired of being someone I hate. Because every time I close my eyes, I see the faces of people I helped Corvin hurt. Because if I don't try to do something right, something good, then what was the point of any of it? She wiped at her eyes angrily. I can't undo what I've done. But I can help you save her. Let me do that much. Calder looked at Greeley, then at Lena. Both nodded slightly. Even Elias, suspicious by nature, seemed convinced. All right, Calder said. You ride with us. But if this is a trap, you can shoot me yourself, Sarah said. I wouldn't blame you. They broke camp in silence, moving out as the last light faded from the sky. Sarah rode beside Elias, pointing out landmarks, explaining the route Corvin's men would use to reach the line shack. Calder listened, filing away every detail, already forming a plan. The truth about Mara's abduction had shifted something fundamental inside him. For 5 years, he had believed himself to be poison, convinced that his very existence brought suffering to those around him. But if Mara had been targeted for reasons that had nothing to do with him, then maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about other things too. Maybe Copper Ridge hadn't been his fault. Maybe the people who died there had been doomed regardless of his presence, caught in the path of men like Brad Corvin, who saw human lives as obstacles to be removed. Maybe his only sin had been trying to stop it and failing. Maybe failure didn't make him poison. Maybe it just made him human. The night deepened around them as they rode north. Stars appeared overhead, cold and distant. Somewhere ahead, in a line shack at the edge of Blackthorn Pass, Mara Ellison waited in darkness. And for the first time in 5 years, Calder Vance wasn't riding alone. They reached the high ground overlooking Blackthorn Pass just after midnight. The canyon spread below them like a wound in the earth, steep walls of red stone plunging down into shadows. The line shack sat near the northern rim, a squat structure built from weathered timber and stone, with a corral for horses and a small shed that probably held supplies. Lamplight showed in 2 windows. Smoke rose from a chimney, barely visible against the dark sky. 3 men stood guard outside, rifles cradled in their arms, faces lit occasionally by the glow of cigarettes. Just like I said, Sarah whispered, crouched beside Calder behind a screen of boulders. 3 outside, rotating every 2 hours. The rest will be inside, probably playing cards or sleeping. They're not expecting trouble this far from town. Where will they keep Mara? Calder asked. There's a root cellar underneath the shack. Stone walls, 1 entrance. They'll have her there, probably tied up. Corvin doesn't take chances with prisoners. Lena studied the layout through her rifle scope. We can't just charge in. They'll cut us down before we get halfway there. We don't charge, Calder said. We split up. Create multiple threats. Force them to divide their attention. How? Tommy asked. Calder began sketching in the dirt, marking positions. Lena, you're our best shot. You take position on that rise to the west. You'll have a clear line on the front of the shack and the corral. When shooting starts, you pick off anyone who comes outside, Lena nodded. I can do that. Elias, you and Sarah stay here with the horses. You're our fallback position. If things go wrong, if we need covering fire to retreat, you provide it. I should be down there with you, Elias protested. You should be where your leg won't get you killed, Calder said bluntly. No offense, but you can't run, and you can't climb. Up here, you're an asset. Down there, you're a liability. Elias scowled but didn't argue further. Sheriff, You come with Tommy and me. We approach from the east, using that dry creek bed for cover. We get as close as we can without being seen, then we move fast. Tommy, you head for the horses in the corral. Cut them loose, create chaos. Sheriff, you and I go for the shack. We get inside, we get Mara, we get out. What about the guards outside? Greeley asked. That's where timing matters. Lena takes the first shot. She drops one of the outside guards. That pulls attention to the west. That's when Tommy moves on the horses. By the time they realize what's happening, we're already inside. And if they're all awake in there? Tommy asked. If they're waiting for us? Then we improvise, Calder said. But they're not expecting us. They think we're still hours behind them if we're following at all. Surprise is our advantage. We use it. They synchronize their movements by the stars, giving everyone time to reach their positions. Lena disappeared into the darkness to the west, rifle in hand. Ellison and Sarah settled in among the rocks, checking weapons and preparing for the worst. Tommy followed Calder and Greeley down the slope toward the dry creek bed, moving in silence, every footfall deliberate. The creek bed was deeper than it looked from above, carved out by decades of flash floods. They moved along it in single file, keeping low, using the banks for cover. The sound of voices drifted from the lined shackmen laughing, the clink of bottles, a card game in progress. Calder checked his pocket watch. 2 minutes until Lena's shot. He looked at Tommy, saw the fear in the boy's eyes but also the determination. Saw himself at that age, before the scars, before the guilt, when he still believed the world could be made right through force of will. Stay calm, Calder whispered to him. Move fast but think clear. If something goes wrong, if you get pinned down, don't try to be a hero. Just get to cover and wait for help. Tommy nodded, his throat working as he swallowed hard. The crack of Lena's rifle split the night. One of the guards outside the shack jerked backward and fell. The other two scrambled for cover, shouting alarms, trying to locate the shooter. Now, Calder hissed. Tommy broke from the creek bed, running low toward the corral. Calder and Greeley moved toward the shack from a different angle, using the confusion to close the distance. More shots from Lena's position. She was keeping the guards pinned, preventing them from getting a clear view of the approaching threats. Inside the shack, men were shouting, grabbing weapons, trying to figure out what was happening. Calder hit the door at a full run, his shoulder driving through the weathered wood. The door burst inward, and he rolled into the room, Colt already drawn. 5 men inside. 2 already moving toward the door, rifles in hand. 3 more at a table, cards scattered, reaching for gun belts. Calder fired twice, dropping the first man with the rifle. Greeley came through the door behind him, his own gun barking, taking down the second. The 3 at the table scattered. 1 dove behind a overturned bunk. Another made it to a window and started shooting wildly into the darkness. The third, a lean man with a scarred face and cold eyes, drew faster than seemed possible and put a bullet into the wall 6 inches from Calder's head. Yet Rourke, the man who had held Calder down at Copper Ridge, who had carved the scars into his face, who had laughed while families burned. Time seemed to slow. Calder saw Rourke's finger tighten on the trigger for a second shot. Saw the recognition in the other man's eyes, the cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, well, Rourke said. Calder Vance, took you long enough to. Greeley's gun thundered. Rourke's head snapped back, the bullet catching him just above the left eye. He crumpled without another word, the smile still frozen on his lips. No time for conversation, Greeley said grimly, already moving deeper into the shack. Outside, chaos reigned. Horses were screaming, hooves pounding as Tommy successfully spooked them into a stampede. Lena's rifle continued its methodical work, each shot calculated, each target carefully chosen. The remaining guards were pinned down, unable to mount an effective defense. Calder found the entrance to the root cellar behind a heavy rug. Wooden stairs led down into darkness. He descended carefully, gun ready, every sense alert for traps. Mara! he called. "Mara, it's Calder Vance." A weak voice from the shadows. "Calder?" He found her in the far corner, hands bound, a bruise darkening her left cheek but otherwise seemingly unharmed. Relief flooded through him, so intense it was almost painful. He holstered his gun and drew his knife, cutting her bonds quickly. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can run," she said, her voice stronger now. "Did you come alone?" "No, I brought help." Something shifted in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or hope. "You never accept help." "I'm learning," he said. They climbed back up into the shack. Greeley had secured the remaining men inside, forcing them to drop their weapons and kneel against the wall. Outside, the shooting had stopped. The corral was empty, horses scattered into the night. Bodies lay motionless in the dirt. Tommy appeared in the doorway, breathless but unharmed. "Horses are gone," he said. "And I think we got most of them." "Most?" Calder asked. "2 riders escaped north," Lena said, joining them. "I couldn't get a clean shot before they reached the canyon. They're heading for Red Mesa, probably to warn Corvin." Calder helped Mara to a chair. She looked at the faces around her, the sheriff, the ranch woman, the boy from the livery. "You all came?" she asked. "For me?" "You're one of ours," Greeley said simply. "Of course we came." Sarah entered last, moving cautiously, staying near the door as if uncertain of her welcome. When Mara saw her, recognition sparked. "You," Mara said. "You worked for them." "I saw you once, in town, meeting with Corvin's men." "I did," Sarah admitted. "I was wrong. I'm trying to make it right." Mara studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then help us finish this." Calder was already thinking ahead. 2 riders had escaped. By dawn, Brant Corvin would know his line shack had been hit, his men killed or captured, his operation exposed. He would come with everything he had, every gun, every killer in his employ. And he would come for blood. "We can't stay here," Calder said. "This place is compromised. We need to move, find defensible ground." "Where?" Greeley asked. "The canyon's a death trap. Open ground makes us targets." "There's an old mine," Elias said from the doorway. He had hobbled down from the ridge, refusing to stay behind when the shooting started. "About 2 miles northeast of here. Abandoned silver mine from 30 years back. Good stone walls, multiple entrances we can block off, high ground for observation. If we're going to make a stand, that's where we do it." "A mine?" Tommy said nervously. "What if it collapses? What if Corvin's men shoot you full of holes?" Elias countered. "Pick your risk, boy." Calder looked at Mara. "Can you ride?" "I told you," she said, standing on legs that were steadier than he expected. "I can run." They gathered what supplies they could from the shack: ammunition, food, water, blankets. Calder found a cache of rifles in the shed, military grade, confirming what they had suspected about Corvin's gun-running operation. They loaded everything onto the few horses they could round up, doubling up when necessary. As they prepared to leave, Mara pulled Calder aside. "You came for me," she said quietly. "After all the years of keeping your distance, of staying away. You came. I owed you a debt," he said. "Is that really why?" He met her eyes. In the lamplight, with bruises on her face and exhaustion in every line of her body, she still carried that same quiet strength that had made him remember what kindness looked like. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "Maybe I just couldn't stand the thought of losing someone else. Maybe I'm tired of running from everything that matters." She touched his arm, the gesture brief but meaningful. "Whatever the reason, thank you, not just for coming. For bringing them." She gestured to the others. "You're not alone anymore, Calder. Whether you wanted it or not, you have people who will stand with you. They're going to get hurt," he said. "Maybe killed because of me. Because I dragged them into this. They're here because they chose to be," Mara said firmly. "Every one of them made that choice knowing the risks. You didn't drag anyone. You gave them a chance to stand for something that matters. There's a difference." Before he could respond, Lena called out that they were ready to move. The group mounted up, heading northeast into country that grew rougher with each passing mile. Behind them, the line shack burned, set ablaze by Greeley to deny its use to anyone else. The flames lit the canyon like a signal fire, announcing to Brad Corvin and the Red Mesa boys that their operation had been exposed, their territory violated, their pride wounded. By dawn, there would be a reckoning. The old silver mine sat on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. The main entrance was little more than a hole in the hillside, shored up with rotting timbers and half-collapsed stonework. But Elias had been right about the defensibility. The approach was steep and exposed, offering no cover for anyone trying to reach them. The mine itself went back into the hillside for perhaps 50 yards, before branching into several smaller tunnels, some blocked by cave-ins, others disappearing into darkness. They spent what remained of the night preparing. Lena positioned herself at the mine entrance with her rifle, establishing a firing position that commanded the valley below. Tommy and Sarah blocked off the smaller tunnels with loose rock and debris, ensuring no one could flank them from inside. Greeley set up their meager supplies deeper in the mine, creating a fallback position. Elias, despite his injured leg, insisted on climbing to a higher vantage point to watch for approaching riders. Calder worked with Mara to inventory their ammunition. It wasn't good. Maybe 200 rounds total, spread across 6 people of varying skill levels. If Corvin came with everything he had, and he would, they might hold out for a few hours at most. "We should send someone for help," Mara said as she counted cartridges. "Ride to Fort McClellan, bring back army troops. Those stolen rifles, the army will want them back. Fort McClellan is 2 days' ride," Calder said. "We don't have 2 days. By noon tomorrow, Corvin will be here. Then we're going to die here." He looked at her, saw the pragmatic acceptance in her eyes rather than fear. She had faced hard truths before, weathered droughts and winters that would have broken lesser people. She wouldn't pretend their situation was better than it was. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe we get lucky. You don't believe in luck. I'm learning about a lot of things lately." She smiled at that, a small expression but genuine. "Who are you, and what have you done with the hermit from the mountains?" The hermit from the mountains finally remembered why people matter, he said. Dawn came slowly, painting the valley in shades of gray and gold. Elias called down from his perch that riders were approaching from the south, at least 20, maybe more. They moved in formation, disciplined and purposeful. At their head rode a man on a white horse, his posture radiating confidence and authority. Brad Corvin had come personally. The riders spread out at the base of the ridge, staying out of rifle range, studying the mine entrance. Calder watched them through a gap in the rocks, memorizing faces, counting weapons. 23 men, all well armed. Against 6 defenders, 2 of whom, Tommy and Sarah, had minimal combat experience. The man on the white horse dismounted and walked forward alone, stopping perhaps 100 yards from the mine entrance. He was younger than Calder expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and carefully groomed facial hair. He wore clothes that were too fine for the Badlands, a long coat that probably cost more than a homesteader earned in a year. "Calder Vance," Corvin's voice carried easily in the still morning air. "I know you're in there. Let's talk like civilized men." "Civilized men don't burn homesteads and kidnap women," Calder shouted back. "Fair point," Corvin laughed. "But civilized men also don't shoot up my line shack and kill my best enforcer. I'd say that makes us even. Yet Rourke was a murderer and a coward. The world's better off without him." "Maybe so, but he was my murderer and my coward." Corvin's tone remained jovial, as if discussing the weather. "Here's the situation, Vance. You've put me in an awkward position. That line shack was important to my operation. More importantly, you've made me look weak in front of my men. I can't allow that. So you have a choice. Come out now, face justice for your crimes, and I'll let your friends go free. Or stay in there, and I'll come in and kill every last one of you. What do you say?" "I say you're a liar," Calder called back. "You'll kill us all regardless." "Well, yes, probably. Corvin admitted cheerfully. But I thought I'd offer the polite option first. Mother always said manners were important. Beside Calder, Greeley shook his head. He's insane. No, Calder said. He's smart. He's stalling, keeping us talking while his men get into position. He's going to rush us from multiple angles. As if on cue, Lena's rifle cracked. Movement on the left flank, she called. 3 men trying to climb the ridge. There's your answer, Corvin, Calder shouted. We're not coming out. You want us, you come get us. Corvin sighed theatrically. Such a shame. I was hoping we could settle this peacefully. Ah well. Boys, kill them all. The valley erupted in gunfire. The first wave hit from 3 directions, left flank, right flank, and straight up the middle. Lena's rifle became a metronome of death, each shot dropping a man, forcing others to seek cover. Tommy fired wildly from a side position, his shots going wide, but the noise itself enough to make attackers hesitate. Greeley's revolver barked steadily, measured and economical. Sarah, despite her admitted lack of skill, managed to wound 2 men who got too close. Calder worked methodically, picking targets, conserving ammunition. The attackers were brave, but not suicidal. After the first rush was repulsed with 4 men down, they pulled back, regrouping, reassessing. They're going to try fire next. Elias called from above, force us out with smoke, let them try. Calder called back. Stone doesn't burn, and this mine's got ventilation shafts. But Corvin was already adapting. The next assault came differently, not a frontal rush, but a careful advance, using covering fire to suppress the defenders, while small groups moved closer under protection. They had leather shields, improvised but effective against handgun rounds. They had patience, willing to take their time rather than throw lives away. An hour passed, then 2. The defenders' ammunition dwindled. Tommy took a bullet through his shoulder, the wound bleeding heavily, but not fatal. Sarah ran out of cartridges and switched to throwing rocks, which was more psychological than effective, but kept attackers' heads down. Elias, from his high perch, used his rifle with a sniper's precision, making every shot count, but even he was running low. By midday, the situation was desperate. They had perhaps 20 rounds left among all of them. Corvin's men had closed to within 50 yards of the mine entrance, close enough that a determined rush would overrun the position. Calder crouched beside Mara in the shadows. Blood from a grazed rib soaked his shirt. Powder burns darkened his face, but his eyes were clear, focused. I'm sorry, he said. I got you into this. You got me out of that root cellar, she corrected. Everything after that was my choice. You're going to die because of me. I'm going to die standing next to people I respect, fighting for something that matters, she said. There are worse ways to go. He wanted to argue to tell her she deserved better, that she deserved to grow old on her homestead, to see grandchildren, to live a full life. But before he could speak, a new sound cut through the afternoon air. Hoofbeats, many of them. Coming from the north, Elias's voice sharp with surprise. Riders coming in. Not Corvin's men. Different colors, different formation. Calder risked a look. Cresting the ridge from the north came perhaps 30 riders, moving fast, flying a flag he recognized, the territorial militia, called out of Fort McClellan. At their head rode a cavalry officer in full uniform, saber drawn. Corvin saw them too. His confidence evaporated. Fall back. He screamed to his men. Fall back now. But the militia had the high ground and momentum. They swept down into the valley, cutting off retreat routes, surrounding Corvin's scattered forces. The battle, such as it was, lasted perhaps 10 minutes. Most of Corvin's men threw down their weapons immediately when faced with military discipline and superior numbers. A few tried to run and were quickly captured. Corvin himself attempted to reach his white horse, but was tackled by 3 soldiers and dragged back in chains. The officer dismounted near the mine entrance, removing his hat as he approached. Sheriff Greeley? Calder Vance? Greeley limped out into the sunlight. That's us. Perfect timing, Captain. Captain Marcus Webb, Fort McClellan Garrison. We received word 2 days ago from a young woman who rode into the fort half dead from exhaustion. She told us about stolen rifles, a smuggling operation, and civilians in danger. We've been riding hard ever since. A young woman? Mara asked, emerging from the mine. Said her name was Rachel Carson. Claimed to be a homesteader from the valley. She insisted we hurry, that you wouldn't last long without support. Webb looked around at the scattered bodies, the defensive positions, the blood-soaked ground. Looks like she was right. Calder felt something unlock in his chest. Rachel Carson, another homesteader from the valley, a widow who lived 5 miles from Mara's place. He had spoken to her exactly once in 3 years, just a brief exchange about weather and water rights. He hadn't thought she even knew his name. But she had ridden for 2 days straight to bring help, because people from the valley looked after each other. Because Mara mattered to them. Because even a hermit in the mountains, if he was part of the community, deserved to be protected. Where is she now? Mara asked. Fort's hospital, Webb said. Dehydrated, exhausted, but she'll recover. Tough woman. Wouldn't take no for an answer until we promised to ride out immediately. They emerged fully from the mine. Calder, Greeley, Lena, Ellison, Tommy with his wounded shoulder, Sarah, and Mara. 6 people who had held off an army against impossible odds. 6 people who, through luck or providence, or sheer bloody-minded determination, had survived. Webb surveyed them with professional respect. We'll need statements from all of you. There are questions about the stolen rifles, about Corvin's operation, about what happened here. But first, let's get your wounded seen to and get you all some food and water. You've earned it. As soldiers moved to secure the area and tend to injuries, Calder found himself standing apart, watching the organized chaos with a strange sense of disconnection. For 5 years, he had believed himself to be fundamentally alone, convinced that solitude was not just his fate, but his purpose. That everyone he touched became tainted by his presence. But he had been wrong. Catastrophically, completely wrong. The people of the valley had come when Mara was taken. They had ridden into danger without hesitation. Rachel Carson had nearly killed herself bringing help. Even Sarah Whitmore, complicit in Corvin's crimes, had turned against her employers when the moral line was finally clear. None of this had happened because of Calder Vance. It had happened despite him. He had been an instrument, perhaps, but not the cause. The people he had led into danger had chosen that danger themselves, clear-eyed and purposeful. Mara found him there, standing alone amid the aftermath. She had a canteen in one hand and offered it to him. He drank deeply, the water cutting through the dust and powder residue in his throat. "You're thinking about leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I should," he said. "I've caused enough trouble." "You've caused justice," she corrected. "Corvin's operation is finished. Those rifles will go back to the army. The homesteaders in the valley can live without fear of being targeted for their land. That's not nothing, Calder. People died today. Good people, yes, and more would have died if you hadn't acted. You can't save everyone, no one can, but you saved me. You exposed a criminal empire. You stood with people when it mattered." She paused. "For what it's worth, I don't think you came for me because of some debt. I think you came because you're a better man than you want to admit." He looked at her, this woman who had shown him kindness when the world showed him scorn, who had treated his wounds without judgment, who had reminded him that humanity was something worth preserving. "I don't know how to be part of something," he said quietly. "I've spent 5 years learning to be alone. Then spend the next 5 learning to be with people," she said. "It's not easy. It's messy and complicated and sometimes painful. But it's better than the alternative." Sheriff Greeley approached, his face drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes alert. "Captain Webb wants to know if you'll testify at Corvin's trial. You're the only one who can connect him directly to Copper Ridge." "Copper Ridge," Calder repeated. "The massacre that had defined him, the crime he had been blamed for, the reason he bore these scars. With your testimony, we can put him away for multiple murders, Not just gun running, Greeley continued. We can make sure he hangs. But it means going public with what happened there. It means people knowing you tried to stop it. For 5 years, Calder had hidden from that truth, had accepted the world's judgment that he was complicit in massacre. It had been easier, in a way, to be the villain. Villains could live alone without question. Heroes were expected to remain among the people they protected. I'll testify, he said. I'll tell them what really happened. Greeley nodded. Good. It's about time the truth came out. As the afternoon wore on, the soldiers established a proper camp. The wounded were treated. Tommy's shoulder was bound. Calder's grazed ribs were cleaned and wrapped. The dead from both sides were respectfully handled, their bodies prepared for burial or returned to families. Brant Corvin sat in chains under guard, his fine clothes torn and dusty, his confidence shattered. Calder sat with the others as evening approached, sharing a simple meal of hardtack and coffee. Lena told stories about her late husband, her voice matter-of-fact but her eyes soft with memory. Elias complained about his leg, but grinned when Tommy reminded him that he'd made that 200-yard shot that had taken out Corvin's best marksman. Tommy himself was pale from blood loss, but animated, reliving the battle with the enthusiasm of youth. Sarah sat slightly apart, uncertain of her welcome, until Mara deliberately moved to sit beside her. You helped save my life, Mara said simply. Whatever you did before, you chose right when it mattered. That counts for something. I don't know if it's enough to make up for what I've done, Sarah said. Maybe not, Mara said, but it's a start. And sometimes that's all any of us get a chance to start again, to be better than we were. Calder listened to their conversations, to the easy camaraderie that had developed among people who had faced death together. He had forgotten what this felt like, the warmth of belonging, the simple comfort of not being alone with his thoughts. When full darkness fell, Captain Webb approached him. Mr. Vance, I have a question. Why did you live alone all these years? After Copper Ridge, why didn't you come forward, tell people what really happened? Calder considered the question. Because I thought I deserved the punishment. Because I failed to stop what happened. Because it was easier to be the villain than to admit I was just powerless. You weren't powerless today, Webb said. You organized a defense, led a rescue, brought down a criminal operation. That's not nothing. I didn't do it alone, Calder said, looking at the others. That's what I learned. Alone, I'm just another man with a gun and a guilty conscience. Together, double quotes, he trailed off, searching for words. Together we're something more. A community, Webb said. That's what the Army calls it. That's what makes civilization possible, people choosing to stand together. Later, when the camp had settled into quiet and guards had been posted, Calder found Mara sitting at a rock outcropping, looking at the stars. He joined her without asking permission. What happens now? He asked. Now? We go home. We rebuild my barn. We testify at Corvin's trial. We try to live normal lives again. She glanced at him. That is, if you're staying. I don't know how to stay. I've forgotten. You remember how to leave, though. You're very good at leaving. He flinched at the truth in that. I'm afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I stay, something bad will happen. That I'll fail again, that people will get hurt because of me. People got hurt today, Mara said bluntly. And they'll get hurt tomorrow, and the day after that. The world is full of suffering, Calder. But it's also full of kindness, and joy, and small moments of grace. You can't prevent all the bad things from happening, but you can be present for the good things. You can choose to be part of something larger than your own guilt. When did you get so wise? When I had to survive 8 years alone on a homestead in drought country, she said. You learn things. You learn that strength comes from connection, not isolation. You learn that the strongest plants are the ones with deep roots, tangled up with other roots, sharing water and nutrients through the soil. You can't survive alone, not really. Not in the way that matters. He sat with that truth, feeling its weight. For 5 years he had believed isolation was safety. But isolation had only given him time to nurse his wounds, to rehearse his failures, to convince himself he was protecting others by staying away. The real protection, the real strength, had come from standing with others, from accepting help, from allowing himself to be part of something that wasn't about his guilt or his scars or his past. "If I stay," he said slowly, "where would I even live? My cabin is 2 days' ride from the valley. I can't protect anyone from that distance. There's a line shack on the northern edge of my property," Mara said. "Small, needs work, but it's got walls and a roof. If someone wanted to stay there, help with ranch work, maybe ride fence and keep watch for trouble. Well, I couldn't pay much, but room and board would be included." He looked at her. In the starlight, her face was shadowed, but he could see the small smile at the corner of her mouth. "You're offering me a job," he said. "I'm offering you a choice," she corrected. "You can go back to your mountains, live alone with your guilt and your scars. Or you can stay, be part of the valley, help rebuild what Corvin tried to destroy. It's not romantic, Calder. It's not redemption or forgiveness or any of those big words. It's just work, and people, and trying to do better tomorrow than you did today. That's all. That's everything." He thought about his cabin in the mountains, about the silence and the solitude that had been his companions for 5 years. And then he thought about today, about Greeley and Lena and Alina and Elias and Tommy, about Sarah choosing to turn against her employers, about Rachel Carson writing herself half to death to bring help, about all these people who had chosen, in their own ways, to stand for something that mattered. He thought about Mara, who had healed his wounds once and was now offering to heal something deeper. "I'll stay," he said, "at least for a while. See how it goes. That's all anyone can ask," she said. One day at a time. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring questions, testimonies, the long process of justice. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Calder Vance wasn't alone. The trial of Brant Corvin lasted 3 days and drew spectators from across the territory. The courthouse in the territorial capital overflowed with people eager to see the infamous outlaw brought to account. Newspapers sent reporters. Artists sketched the proceedings. The judge, a stern man with no tolerance for theatrics, maintained order with an iron gavel. Calder testified on the second day. He described Copper Ridge in detail, the night the Red Mesa boys had come, how he had tried to warn the settlement, how he had fought against his own former companions to prevent the massacre. He told them about Yet Rourke holding him down, about watching families die, about the scars that marked him as a traitor to the gang and a suspect to everyone else. His voice was steady throughout. He didn't ask for sympathy or understanding. He simply told the truth, letting the facts speak for themselves. When the defense attorney tried to discredit him, suggesting he was lying to save himself, it was Sheriff Greeley who stood and testified to Calder's character. Then Lena Harrow. Then Elias Strand. Then Tommy Rook, his arm still in a sling. One by one, they described how Calder had organized the rescue, had fought to save Mara, had risked everything to stop Corvin's operation. "This is a man," Greeley said from the witness stand. "Who could have run? Who could have hidden? Instead, he stood. That tells you everything you need to know about his character." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Brant Corvin was found guilty on 14 counts of murder, theft of military property, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced him to hang. Corvin, for his part, remained defiant to the end. "You can kill me," he shouted as they led him away, "but you can't kill what I built. There will always be men like me. There will always be." The bailiffs dragged him out before he could finish. Outside the courthouse, Calder stood with the others, blinking in the bright sunlight. It was done. The truth was public record now. The blame that had followed him for 5 years had been lifted, replaced by a more complicated truth, that he had tried to stop evil and failed, but that failure didn't make him evil himself. "What now?" Tommy asked. His shoulder was healing well, though he would carry a scar of his own now. Now we go home, Greeley said. Back to the valley. Back to normal life. Is there such a thing as normal after all this? Sarah asked. She had testified too, providing detailed records of Corvin's smuggling operation, purchasing immunity in exchange for cooperation. We'll find out, Lena said. One day at a time, they rode back to the valley together, a strange caravan of survivors and witnesses. The journey took 3 days, through country that was growing green again after autumn rains. By the time they reached Redemption, news of the verdict had preceded them. People lined the streets, not cheering, this wasn't a celebration, but acknowledging them, nodding respect, offering quiet words of thanks. Mara's homestead looked different in the daylight. The barn was gone, burned to the foundation, but the house stood whole. Several someones, judging by the variety of tools and materials, had already begun clearing the debris, laying the groundwork for a new barn. Rachel Carson was there, thinner than Calder remembered, but smiling. She embraced Mara fiercely. "Thought I'd lost you," she said. "Thought I hadn't ridden fast enough." "You rode exactly fast enough," Mara said. "You saved all our lives." Other neighbors had come, 2 homesteaders from up and down the valley, people whose names Calder barely knew but whose faces he recognized. They had brought food, lumber, labor. They had come because Mara was one of theirs, because helping each other was what communities did. And Calder was, for the first time in 5 years, part of that community. Over the following weeks, he settled into the rhythm of ranch work. The line shack Mara had mentioned needed more than work it, needed a complete rebuild. He spent his days doing that, learning carpentry from Elias, who turned out to have a gift for construction despite his injured leg. Tommy came by in the evenings, practicing his shooting under Calder's tutelage, slowly transforming from an eager boy into a competent young man. Lena Harrow visited often, bringing supplies and staying for coffee, her Winchester always within reach but her guards slowly lowering. Sarah Whitmore found work at the general store in Redemption, using her talent with numbers and honest employment for the first time. Sheriff Greeley stopped by weekly, ostensibly to check on Mara's safety, but really just to sit on the porch and smoke his pipe in comfortable silence. And Mara was constant. She worked her land with the same quiet determination she had always shown, but now she wasn't alone. Calder found himself helping with 100 small tasks, fixing fences, moving cattle, hauling water, digging irrigation channels. The work was hard and endless, but it was honest. It meant something. One evening, about a month after the trial, Calder stood on the porch of his rebuilt line shack, watching the sun set over the valley. The new barn on Mara's property was nearly complete, a community effort that had taken only 3 weeks. Tomorrow there would be a barn-raising celebration, with food and music and all the neighbors gathering to mark the occasion. He heard footsteps behind him. Mara climbed the 3 steps to the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him one. "Thanks." They stood side by side, watching the light fade from the sky. The scars on Calder's face had faded from red to white, less prominent now, less defining. He would always carry them, always have that visible reminder of Copper Ridge, but they didn't define him anymore. They were just part of his story, not the whole of it. "You've been quiet today," Mara said. "Thinking. About?" "About how wrong I was. About everything." He took a sip of coffee. "I spent 5 years believing I was poison, that everyone I touched would suffer. But you suffered because of Corvin, not because of me. The people who helped rescue you chose that danger themselves, even Copper Ridge. I don't know if I could have stopped it. Maybe I was just one man against a tide of evil. Maybe trying and failing was all I could do. Maybe trying and failing is enough," Mara said. "Maybe that's what makes us human, the trying, not the outcome." "When did you get so philosophical?" "When I hired a hermit to work my ranch and had to figure out how to make him understand he wasn't cursed," she smiled. "You're not poison, Calder. You never were. You were just a man who made mistakes, same as everyone else. The difference is you let those mistakes define you for 5 years. That stops now. Just like that? Just like that. He looked at her, this woman who had shown him kindness, who had survived abduction and violence, who had offered him not redemption, but something simpler and more profound, a place to belong. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said. The words surprised him as much as they surprised her. He hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even fully acknowledged the feeling until it was voiced. She set down her coffee cup carefully. "I know," she said. "You know? I've known for a while. You're not as mysterious as you think you are." She turned to face him fully. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know. I've never been very good at this." "Neither have I," she admitted. "I've been alone for 8 years. I've learned to be independent, to not need anyone. But there's a difference between not needing someone and not wanting them." She touched his face, her fingers tracing the scars gently. "I want you here, Calder. Not because I need protection or help with the ranch. Because you make me remember that there's more to life than just surviving. Because you stood in front of a gang of killers to save me. Because when the whole world told you to stay away from people, you finally chose to stay." He kissed her. It was tentative at first, uncertain, like a man relearning a language he had once spoken fluently. But she kissed him back. And in that moment, 5 years of solitude and guilt and self-imposed exile fell away like old skin. When they finally parted, she was smiling. "So you're staying?" she asked. "I'm staying," he confirmed. "Not as a hired hand or a ranch worker, but as ... whatever this is. Whatever we're building here. We're building a life," she said simply. "That's all. That's everything." The next day, the valley gathered for the barn-raising celebration. Tables were set up outside Mara's house, groaning with food brought by dozens of families. Children ran through the fields, playing games as old as settlement itself. Men and women worked together to put the finishing touches on the new barn, their voices rising in song as they hammered and sawed. Calder stood slightly apart, watching it all, still uncomfortable with crowds, but no longer afraid of them. Greeley joined him, offering a flask. "To new beginnings," the sheriff said. They drank. "You did good, Vance," Greeley said. "You could have kept running. Instead, you stood. You saved lives. You brought down a criminal empire. That matters. We did it together," Calder said. "I couldn't have done it alone." "No," Greeley agreed. "None of us could have." "That's the point," he paused. "I'm getting old, Vance. My deputy quit last month, moved to California to try his luck in the gold fields. I need someone who knows the country, who can track, who can handle themselves in a fight. You interested?" Calder looked at him in surprise. "You're offering me a badge?" "I'm offering you a job. The badge comes with it, but what I really need is someone I can trust. Someone who'll do right even when it's hard. You've proven you're that man. I'm not a lawman. Neither was I when I started," Greeley said. "I was just a man who wanted to help. Rest came with time." He extended his hand. "Think about it. No pressure. But the valley could use someone like you wearing a star." Before Calder could respond, Tommy ran up, breathless with excitement. "Mr. Vance, Miss Harrow wants to show you something." Lena had set up a shooting competition, much to the delight of the younger men and a few of the women. Targets were arranged at various distances, and a small crowd had gathered to watch. When Calder approached, Lena handed him a rifle. "Show these youngsters how it's done," she said with a small smile. "Teach them proper respect for marksmanship." He took the rifle, checked it automatically, and settled into position. The first target was 100 yards out. He fired, and the target spun. The second was further, maybe 150 yards. Another clean hit. The third was partially obscured by brush, requiring calculation for wind and obstruction. He fired once, and the target fell. The crowd applauded. Tommy whooped. Even Elias, watching from his chair, raised his cup in salute. "Not bad for a hermit," Lena said. "Maybe you've got a future as an exhibition shooter." "I'd rather just be a ranch hand," Calder said, handing back the rifle. Too late for that, Lena said. You're a hero now, whether you like it or not. The man who brought down Brant Corvin. The survivor of Copper Ridge who finally got his justice. People are going to look up to you. Best figure out how to handle that. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, neighbors, friends, people who had chosen to stand with him. People who had chosen to believe in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. This was what he had lost at Copper Ridge and thought he would never find again. Connection, community, purpose beyond mere survival. As the sun began to set, someone brought out a fiddle and music filled the air. Couples danced in the space between the house and the new barn. Children chased fireflies. Old men told stories. The smell of food and tobacco smoke and fresh-cut wood hung sweet in the evening air. Mara found him again, took his hand without asking permission, and led him into the dancing. He protested that he didn't know how, but she ignored him, placing his hand on her waist, taking his other hand in hers. Just follow, she said. Don't think so much. So he followed. And slowly, awkwardly at first, but with growing confidence, he remembered how to move, how to be part of something larger than himself, how to let go of the past long enough to be present in the moment. They danced as the stars came out, as the fire burned down to embers, as the valley settled into peaceful darkness. And for the first time in 5 years, Calder Vance felt something he had thought lost forever. He felt at home. 3 months later, on a cold January morning, Calder Vance was sworn in as deputy sheriff of the territorial district that included Redemption and the surrounding valley. He wore the tin star with humility rather than pride, understanding it as a responsibility rather than an honor. His first official act was to ride the boundary lines, checking on isolated homesteads, making sure families had enough supplies to make it through winter. His second was to establish a regular patrol route through the Badlands, ensuring that no one else tried to establish smuggling operations in Blackthorn Pass. He and Mara were married in April in a simple ceremony in the Valley Church. Greeley stood as best man. Lena and Sarah stood up for Mara. Tommy, promoted to Calder's official deputy assistant, tried not to cry and failed. Elias played the fiddle, his crushed leg healing slowly, but his spirits undimmed. They built a house together on Mara's land, larger than the line shack, with room for a future that neither of them could fully see yet, but both were willing to embrace. The house had a porch facing west, where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set over the valley, where they could see their neighbors' lights coming on as darkness fell, small beacons of human warmth against the vast indifference of the wilderness. The scars on Calder's face remained, would always remain, but they had become simply part of who he was, rather than all of who he was. Children no longer stared. Adults no longer whispered. He was just Calder Vance, the deputy sheriff, Mara's husband, the man who had helped bring down the Red Mesa boys. One evening in early summer, sitting on that porch with coffee growing cold in their cups, Mara asked him a question. Do you ever regret it? Staying, giving up your solitude? He thought about it seriously, as he thought about everything these days carefully, honestly, without the weight of guilt that had once colored every decision. No, he said finally, the solitude was never peace. It was just absence. This, he gestured to the valley, to the distant lights, to her beside him. This is peace. It's complicated and messy and sometimes difficult, but it's real. It matters. And the nightmares? Do you still dream about Copper Ridge? Sometimes, he admitted, but now when I wake up you're there. That makes a difference. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, as the valley settled into its nightly rhythms, as the wind moved through the grass like breathing. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Another answered. The eternal conversation of wild things, speaking their truths to the night. Calder listened to them and felt no kinship, no urge to join their solitary wandering. He had his own pack now, his own family, bound not by blood, but by choice and shared hardship and mutual respect. He had been alone for so long, had believed loneliness was his fate, his punishment, his identity. But he had been wrong. The man who walked alone was not stronger or safer or purer for his solitude. He was simply alone. And Calder Vance was done being alone. "I love you," he said to Mara, the words coming easier now, more natural. "I know," she said, smiling. "I love you too." They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen connection over isolation, who had learned that strength came not from walls but from bridges, not from distance but from presence. The valley was quiet, the stars were bright, and the man with the scarred face, the outcast, the exile, the ghost of Copper Ridge, had finally found his way home. The story ended where so many begin, with hope, with possibility, with two people facing an uncertain future together rather than facing certain darkness alone. And if that wasn't redemption, if it wasn't forgiveness or salvation, or any of those grand impossible things, it was something better. It was simply enough.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.